This is Downey, and this is my final project for MTI563. I thought it only appropriate that we begin with a warm-up, and I happen to have a Google form ready to go. Value of differentiation. How many tools has Ann tried in class since 563 started? Millions, billions, a whole lot, or none? Well, it's definitely not none, and it's not millions yet, but it is definitely a whole lot. Which of the following is a tool used by Ann just since class started? In fact, it is all of the above and more. Is Ann pleasantly surprised by the ease with which she has learned to differentiate? Yes, sirree, I definitely am. All of the above. Now that I have your brain warmed up, we can get to the meat of the matter. I took the North Carolina State University test and found that I am well balanced in 3 areas and completely out of whack in another. I tend to be slightly reflective and slightly global, mildly visual, but wildly intuitive. I found out that I am absolutely not an engineer. Now, in an effort to use one of my new tools, I decided to make a map of the things I do with my free time in order to see visually what the test tells me in words. I used the term bubble.us, which I used with my freshman English students a couple of weeks ago. They were divided into collaborative groups, and they had to brainstorm examples from a text and then organize them into categories. They really enjoyed working together and coming up with ideas, and they loved using the tool. And then each student had to choose one of the categories with the examples and then craft that into a more formal paper. So it was a really nice way to start out the paper writing process. So I used that here, and forgive me if this seems self-indulgent, but it is an alternative way to understand who I am. So I began by mapping all of my leisure activities, and those are the green boxes. Whoops, wrong way. And the leisure activities and the 3 things I do for work, teaching English and Spanish and doing landscape design. And everything, when I looked at it, kind of fell into 4 categories, and those are love of language. I sort of love this tool when you just drag it over and things change color. It's just really neat. Love of nature, love of activity, and then love of art. And so, in looking at this visual representation of myself, I better understand the rather solitary assessment of me indicated by the results of the test. But I can also clearly see the desire to and the capacity for exploration. So, for instance, I didn't read anything before I bought and assembled my first beehive. So we're talking about raising bees. I did watch a YouTube video on how to install package bees when I got them, but that was about it. I thought it would be easy to figure out as I went along, and so I dove in, and many years and many stings later, I was able to sweeten up the holidays by selling my honey around Christmas time. So here's some of my bees, and I can say things now like, wow, look at the really nearly perfect brood pattern. Something I couldn't say before. Now I'm going to transition back to talking about my students because they're the real reason that I did this. And I can see a lot of different learning styles among them. For instance, I discovered years ago that it is very difficult for some kids to understand the Odyssey of Homer when they plow through the reading. And we read the unabridged version in class. So I spent a summer reading the epic into my computer using Audacity and then uploading it onto SoundCloud. Maybe you'd like to hear some. Here it is on my Moodle page.
The Odyssey of Homer, Book 1. Muse, tell me of the man of many wiles, the man who wandered many paths of exile after he sacked Troy's sacred citadel. He saw the cities, mapped the minds of many, and on the sea his spirit suffered every adversity to keep his life intact, to bring his comrades back. In that last task, his will was firm and fast, and yet he failed. He could.
As you can hear, it's the whole epic. And then if you can see on this graphic, I was able to, using SoundCloud, add in little questions from myself, little things that kind of break up the reading, and kind of cue the students into things that they should be listening for, things we've talked about in class. I'm able to upload pictures, and it's just become a wonderful tool. So I was a big believer. I found that this tool saved a lot of kids, especially the ones who learned really well by listening. So I thought, why not do more? And recently I assigned a video for my Spanish students, and they had to teach a grammatical concept in less than 3 minutes. And there were virtually no parameters aside from the timing, the Spanish, and the tech. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of their work. This first one is from a student who has significant executive functioning issues and cannot make heads or tails out of notes. And it doesn't make it easier that the class is conducted entirely in Spanish. You'll notice he has a little sweatshirt on that's called Downey. That's a bit of an inside joke with my students in that class. And it's sort of a charming thing that he did.
Hello, class. Today we are going to be learning how to tell time in Spanish.
It turns out this particular kid loves creating videos and has even done a claymation music video for his dad, who is a professional musician. I was blown away. The next one is from a kid who looks bored in class every single day.
Hola Moochies! Today Sam and I are going to be talking about stem-changing verbs that go from O to UE. What is a stem-changing verb, you may ask? The main form of this verb is called the infinitive. Some Spanish verbs are called the stem changers because when they're conjugated, the stem changes in a predictable way. In one group of stem-changing verbs, the letter O in the stem changes to UE in all but nosotros and vosotros forms.
I knew this kid was into music, but he used his love of music making to make Spanish understandable for his peers. What was particularly cool about this one is the kid who did most of the tech work on it used this project as a way to teach himself how to make the text bounce along with the music that he was writing. There's some technique, and I can't remember what he called it, but he figured it out because I assigned this project. So that was really a worthwhile thing for this young man. Now, to be fair, I also got this.
Yo es vivo, the two es ves, the usted es vive.
No, I cannot in good conscience have you watch any more of this. This chap taped himself writing in his notebook for 2 or almost 3 minutes and never bothered to notice that it was upside down for his viewer. Clearly, he has a learning style that I have not yet tapped into. I guess you can see that I found the differentiation strategies useful. I have a million ideas floating around in my head and no time to implement all of them. I've definitely relearned that I need to get kids up, tap into their creativity, show them where home plate is, and let them get there in whatever way makes sense for them. I also think it's incredibly valuable to have students try things that are not comfortable for them, to get them to experience the cognitive dissonance that many of their peers feel every day in an ordinary classroom. And I firmly believe that that dissonance will push them and challenge them to try new things. Speaking of trying new things, I tried comics. Now, I have never been a fan of comic books, although I do read the funny papers every day, but I know that the comic book genre or form appeals to my students, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And in my unit about travel in my Spanish class, I had some rather lackluster presentations during round 1. So nearly every kid in the group got up in front of the class and read from his notebook to express his love of playing basketball here in Milwaukee and when he travels to Mexico. The students were wholly unprepared, and most of them used only the words with which they are familiar and comfortable, basketball being one of them. So I tried again. In round 2, I challenged them to prepare a skit and to memorize it. And the results were better, but not terribly clever or inventive. For instance, almost everybody was still playing basketball. For round 3, I assigned them to create a 3 or 4 cell comic in Storyboard That, in which their characters move around, talk about the weather, discuss what they want to do on vacation, and I really challenged them to dive into the vocabulary and use some more verbs and some of the language of travel. And here's a couple of examples of what I got when I challenged them. So in this first one, I don't know why Jesus and Santa are at a gas station, but it made sense to them, and I guess they're working a theme there. And here's Santa and Jesus at the Golden Gate Bridge, and then here they are in a bus. I don't know why there's a baby and an alien in there as well, and some sort of a slug-type creature, but it made sense to them, and I guess that's okay when they have their little jokes. What was good about this is that they did use more vocabulary than they had used in their presentations, and they attempted some things. This one was much better than the last one, which I also thought was better than their presentations. So here they have their characters before the gates of Hades, I imagine, and then somewhere in outer space. And they're using a lot of different vocabulary here, and while accomplishing the goal that I set for them. And then it's kind of another little inside joke about the Taco Bell, but they've always got one character who wants Taco Bell. And then in the final 2 panels, we've got them in what seems to be a Taco Bell, and then in this apocalyptic universe. They used the Spanish, they used the language, they had fun with it, they enjoyed doing the project. That's a win on all sides as far as I'm concerned. So I guess the bottom line is that I'm now a big believer in differentiating my classroom to allow kids to do things that are fun for them, but also accomplish the goal of learning whatever material we're trying to learn. I appreciate being pushed in this class and challenged to try new things. It has been a wonderful learning experience for me. So the last thing I need to do is share my information with you. And here it is, Ann Downey. And then both my Twitter handle and my Gmail account are downeyak@gmail.com. And I think it's only appropriate that we end with an exit ticket. How about a Google-a-day? What country called for a boycott of an late-night comedian who made offensive remarks during an Amy Winehouse segment? I have no idea, but I'm going to say it's Qatar. And with that, I bid you adieu.